All right, well, welcome to acquisitions training for Evergreen 3.11. We are in, I think, well into the upgrade at this point. I think most of the people that I'm seeing here on this participants list have touched the new version of acquisitions in some way, because I think I've gotten tickets from almost all of you at this point. So today is not going to be so much a deep dive into how to do everything. It's more of a, this is what's changed, these are the issues we know of, and an opportunity for you to ask about the things you've got questions on, to bring new issues to our attention that maybe we haven't seen yet, and to see things in action that you're curious about. So I've got sort of an agenda, but I'm hoping to keep it a little bit loose so that there's plenty of room for questions. So don't hesitate to let me know if you want to see something in more detail, to just raise your hand or put something in the chat. And we'll hopefully get all your questions, or at least a lot of your questions, answered by the end of the day today. So today we're, like I said, it's not super structured, but I do have sort of a general agenda. We're going to talk about the basics of the Angular interface, kind of when we talk about how acquisitions has been Angularized, what does that actually mean? We'll be talking how the new interface has affected line items, selection lists, the mark uploader, and purchase orders. And we'll actually probably switch those last two and do purchase orders first, and then look at the mark uploader kind of isolated on its own at the end. And we'll talk a little bit about the new receive shipment feature for EDI, which basically is the feature that allows you to set it up so that your vendor can put a barcode on the boxes they ship you, and you can scan that barcode when it comes in, and that will mark the items that are in that box as received. And I think at this point, Onslow is doing that, but I'm not sure anybody else has started that process. I don't think I see anyone from Onslow in here. If somebody does pop in, we can ask. Oh,
Odds to work.
so if anybody from Onslow just pop in, then we can ask them how that's going. But there's not really much to it. We've done the setup that needs to happen on our ends. So it's really a matter of you having a conversation with your vendors, but we'll talk a little bit about that. So before we get into acquisitions itself, I just wanted to talk briefly about Angular. Because Angular itself is kind of the basis on which all of these changes are coming from. And there's nothing really that new about it. It's something that has already been in place in a lot of the cataloging interfaces and a lot of the circulation interfaces. So it's really just bringing acquisitions into the same interface that people are getting familiar with in these other areas of Evergreen. And it's really just kind of it's a common set of components. And then the services and tools and utilities related to those components. Basically, what it means is everything is set up as a grid, and those grids can be filtered and sorted in specific ways. And that's kind of the big thing that makes Angular different from older versions of Evergreen, and specifically in the case of acquisitions, what makes these new interfaces different than the old interfaces. Functionality speaking, you're doing the same things when you're creating a selection list or a purchase order. It just kind of looks different and it interacts a little bit differently. So it has brought up a couple of different confusing points and things like that. So we'll talk about those. Basically, in terms of which acquisitions workflows were affected by this upgrade: selection lists, purchase orders, and line items. And then also the mark uploader, which is really kind of part of purchase orders, but I do want to call it out as its own thing. And so those have all been upgraded. So that means that invoices have not been. So those of you who've already been kind of working within the new interface, you've probably noticed that all of your purchase orders look different than they used to, but your invoices look the same. So invoices have not yet been updated to Angular. Some common elements of the Angular interface, and these will be things that you're familiar with from other areas of Evergreen. Um, Basically, grids. Everything is laid out in a grid. It's the table layout that we kind of see, if you're searching for a patron or something like that. It's made up of a variety of columns. And then, of course, those columns um, can be manipulated by adding and taking away the columns that you need so that you can make the grid exactly what it is you want to see. You can also change the column order and change the width and all that kind of stuff. So that column picker that you're familiar with within various different parts of Evergreen, that's now available within acquisitions as well. So let's take like a really brief look at that. I know it's going to be familiar for a lot of people, but just so that you kind of see what I mean when I talk about these different aspects. So this is our grid. This is the search, which had already been angularized. Let's actually go into a purchase order. Actually, I want to do one that I did specifically. So even though it's listed as a Stanley one, it's not one of their real ones. I just want to make sure that if there's anything weird or confusing on it, you know that that came from me and not them. So we'll take a look within a purchase order itself. Of course, you can see a little bit of this in practice right now as I'm doing things like clicking on creation time to change the order of the columns. I've basically made it so that the newest ones are coming up at the top. I'm going to click on my name hyperlink over here to actually get into the purchase order. And so you'll see that there's a lot of the same functionality in terms of grids in here as well. We have this new navigation setup. We have the ability to change the number of rows. That's a common feature of Angular, is that you can look at only 5. In this particular case, this purchase order only has 1 on it. But if it had 500 on it, I would recommend that you turn it into more than one purchase order, but you could see all 500 of those rows at once. Go back to our grid. So this is a pretty typical setup for a grid. So when I talk about the column picker, I'm talking about this little wheel icon that allows you to come in and just change, the specific columns that are showing up in this grid. So I'm going to say, let's take a look at the creator, but let's remove cancel reason, because at this point, I don't have anything that's been canceled. So I can manipulate what shows up in my grid. And that, like I said, that's very common within Evergreen. Most of you have seen that before this point. And of course, it has existed within the search aspect of acquisitions for a while. Other things that are common to Angular are the filtering options. So you can come up here and let's say that I wanted to filter to only look at providers. Let's look at Ingram providers. And so that allows me to just sort of filter down all of these purchase orders down to just those that are from the specific provider. And then, of course, you can also, one of the things that you see a lot of is the different types of scoping. So, when you're doing a catalog search, you scope down to your system or your branch. Within acquisitions, of course, your scoping is happening up here at the top when you're putting together your search. So, you can scope based on a lot of different factors, and then you put in your criteria for that scoping. And as I said, none of this part is new. It just becomes new once you realize that it's been applied beyond the search page and into the actual purchase orders and selection lists themselves. Also, I just wanted to point out a couple of things that are kind of useful that have to do with Angular that I'm not sure everybody's very familiar with. Primarily, I wanted to talk about the keyboard shortcuts because I wasn't super familiar with these until I started prepping for today. And I discovered that there are all kinds of really useful keyboard shortcuts for getting around Evergreen in the parts that have been Angularized. So for example, I can do a quick navigate to catalog by pushing F3 on my keyboard, and that takes me right into the catalog. And I just thought that was kind of cool. And in case anybody was not familiar with that, I wanted to point it out. There are a couple others. Check-in is F2. Item status is F5. I don't have an item. Yep. So there are a couple different keyboard shortcuts that might be useful for you, and I just wanted to talk about those briefly because I thought they were pretty cool. All right. So that's just kind of an overview of Angular and what we mean when we talk about the fact that acquisitions has been Angularized. Now I want to actually go in and look at the different pieces of acquisitions. And at this point, if you have questions at any point along the way, please feel free to let me know. So one of the first things that I wanted to talk about was line items. Line items are the building blocks of each step of the daily workflow. So they are the actual, book title or DVD that you're ordering. They represent all of the attributes of that resource that's being ordered. So information about like its ISBN. You'll get information about price, things like that. The number of copies to be ordered is going to be included at the line item level. The fund that's being used to purchase those items is at the line item level, and then the distribution of the copies within the system that's ordering them. So, for example, if Cumberland orders 5 different copies of a book and they're going to 5 different branches, that information is all stored on a single line item at that level. The line item itself is created from a record. This record could be a brief record. It could be a record that was supplied by a vendor. It could be a record that already exists within the catalog, or it could be a record that you import yourself. Once you have created a line item, then you can move it through the entire daily workflow process. So basically the same line item is going to be connected to your purchase order as to your selection list and your invoice. And so that same line item kind of connects all of the different steps, regardless of which steps you use. You may not use selection lists, but if you made one, then that same line item would be connected. If you create your line item at the point of invoicing, you can actually backport that into the purchase order. And they can be really created at any point in the workflow. So basically, whichever point your library chooses to enter the ordering cycle, that is the point where you create your line item, whether that is at the very beginning of the selection list or at the point of invoicing. So I wanted to take a look at an actual line item. We were having some trouble with Next earlier, so I'm in an incognito window and I'm hoping I'm able to get to everything I want to. So I'm going to start from the line item search, and I'm just going to search for a line item that was created by me. So this is kind of what the Angular grid looks like at the line item level. And I'm not sure a lot of people really search for line items directly. I think oftentimes you get to line items because you've started at a purchase order and you kind of work your way back. But if you ever do search for line items, this is what you see when you make that search. So I'm going to use my Angular grid to do a little bit of changes to make this more readable. I'm going to change my creation time to pull up something that's fairly recent. I was testing some stuff earlier today, so I've got earlier this week, so I've got a few different things that we can look at. But basically, you can see that anything a line item is connected to then becomes something that you can link out to from the line item grid itself. So I can go into the purchase order for this particular one. For now, we're going to look at the worksheet. So this is the biggest change to line items in this update that you'll see, and that's the worksheet itself. You'll see down here in this box, this is basically what we had before. So in the 3.9 version, when you went into the worksheet, you basically saw the information that is in this box. So you got the information about like the title, author, item count, line item ID, all of that was there. What we have now is that you have information up at the top that gives you more about the purchase order that line item is connected to, if it is connected to one. If it's not, but it's connected to a selection list, you'll get the selection list information at the top. Basically, it'll give you the information for the piece of the acquisitions puzzle that it is currently connected to, or that it's sort of the most recent one that it's connected to. And so this is useful because I can see all this information about my line item, which is essentially nothing. I haven't done anything with it yet. But I can also see, that it's attached to this specific purchase order and that this purchase order is not activatable. So I'm not actually in a position where I can order this line item yet. And I know that I can't because it has no price, which I can tell by kind of looking at it down here, seeing the estimated price is set to 0. And then I can get back to my grid by clicking on, or actually this takes me back to the purchase order by clicking on that return button. So for the most part, line items haven't changed much in terms of what is in them. It's just the big change is that they are connected to that purchase order or selection list directly within the worksheet. The other big change, and I don't know how many of you actually caught this as I was doing it, but the loading time is significantly shorter. From my search, I clicked on purchase order and I got right to it. And I don't know how many of you remember in 9.3 when you would click on a line item and you'd get into that worksheet and it would sit there with that gray loading bar for sometimes probably 30 seconds or more, which isn't a long time in the grand scheme of things, but it felt like an eternity when you were waiting for something so simple to load. So the loading time has been significantly reduced, and that alone, I think, is worth all of the other changes that have come in, is that everything within acquisitions loads much more quickly now. All right, so there's not a whole lot to line items that's changed. Most of the big changes are really going to come at the selection list and purchase order level. So let's get into those, but does anybody have any questions about line items at this point? What is the difference between an on order line item record and an imported line item record? So I think I was a little bit unclear when I was talking about it. I've sort of meant on order as imported, like when you import something from your vendor. And I think I got that vocabulary from the actual Evergreen documentation, which is why it didn't make a lot of sense with how I usually talk about it. So when I was talking about on order versus imported, on order would be the records that you get from a vendor and import. And then when I was talking about importing, I meant like a Z3950 kind of thing. Does that clear that up? There's not necessarily always cohesive vocabulary around this. The upgrade didn't help with that because a lot of things that were called one thing pre-upgrade are called something else now. One of the things we'll talk about is copies versus items. So that the vocabulary for that has changed. It means the same thing, but in 3.9, we called them items, and in 3.11, we called them copies. So I'm still kind of, I think, getting used to some of the vocabulary changes. All right, so line items haven't had a huge change. There's an aesthetic difference. There's that wonderful link to the purchase order itself. And of course, there's the loading time reduction. Selection lists, on the other hand, are quite different. So we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at those. I know not all of our libraries use them, but for those that do, I know that there have been some sort of a little bit of growing pains with these changes. So feel free to ask questions as we're moving through. So the new features, basically the Angular interface obviously is the big one, which is primarily aesthetic and kind of allows you to interact with them a little bit differently, but it doesn't have any real structural meaning. Some things that do, one of the things that you can do now is add line item notes manually. So previously you could add notes there were a couple of different ways, but the big one was honestly to have something in your mark record itself. And then that would, it was some field Z, I think, or maybe N. And basically you put that in there and then it would be attached to the record and to the item. You now have the ability to add those manually from the interface itself and the option of making them vendor public or not. So this is a good way for you to kind of mark what something is for once it's ordered. routing information, things like that. It's also a good way for you to, put information in for your vendor that's maybe not specific to the purchase itself, but that you feel like they need to know in preparation for processing the order. It's now, because of the Angular changes, you can now filter and sort much more easily. So if you have a really long selection list, you're able to actually kind of filter that down and look at it from, look at only slices of it. You're able to sort it by different factors. So we'll look at that in a second. And then of course you can navigate through it the way you can through different types of Angular interfaces, where you now have the ability to change how many line items you're seeing on a single selection list or a single page within a selection list. You can navigate through these pages. You can set it to maybe look at just 5 line items at a time and then navigate through each of those pages. You also have the ability, and I don't think you could do this before, but if I'm wrong, please let me know, to create a purchase order from only selected line items. So if you wanted to create a purchase order from only 3 or 4 line items on a single selection list that has, 5 or 6, then you can do that. You can create one purchase order for some line items and then another purchase order for the remainder. And then you can also create your selection list at the point that you're adding items from the catalog. So previously, when you tried to, when you were manually adding something that existed in the catalog to a selection list, that selection list had to already have been created. You now have the ability to create the selection list at that point. So I'll show you what that looks like. Before we look at it live, there are a couple of issues that we've discovered around selection lists. The biggest one is permission changes. Previously, to work with purchase orders and invoices, you had to have cataloging permissions, but selection lists, you just had to have circulator permissions. That has changed. There is one particular permission that was not part of the sort of package before, but is now needed in order to add line items to selection lists. And then there's a second one that is needed to be able to kind of navigate through selection lists, and circulators only have one of those two by default. So we are kind of discussing whether or not we want to make it possible to have both of those permissions available at a circulation lead account, or whether or not we would like to ask anybody who will be working with selection lists to take the cataloger assessment. Right now, I think the only library that's run into that issue is Northwestern, and we've got you all kind of set up to work within that system. But we're kind of trying to figure out what our long-term solution for that particular one is going to be. The other one is that when you're creating a brief record for a selection list, there's an identifier field where you would, typically put in the ISBN. Somehow that got missed when they were putting this together, and it's not mapped to anything, which means if you put any information in that field, the selection list will fail. It won't be created. So right now we're asking you to just skip that field and then go in and manually add it into the MARC record once you've gone on to the next step, which is a little bit of a pain. So I apologize for that. It is an active bug. We've added heat to it. I think it is actively being worked on. So we're hoping that that'll be fixed by the next upgrade, if not sooner. So just an update on some of the issues we've run into. If there are other issues that you've run into, please let me know. The budget line option. Do you mean the fund? Okay, the funds tab, yeah. Let's go ahead and go into a selection list and kind of look around. This one. So are you talking about the fund? Like when you're adding in the items at this point?
Okay, I haven't seen that section. I just do selection list and
Okay, so this is part of selection lists.
okay, I haven't seen
Let me
that.
pull something up real quick. So if I go into our dev server is still running 3.9. So let's take a look at a selection list in here. Give me a moment. I don't know when the last time I made a selection list in this in dev is. All right, I've got something. See the difference in the loading time there? Okay. I don't know if this is just that there's nothing in this selection list or if it's taking forever to load. Let's try a different one. There we go. All right. So is up here, is this what you're talking about? Okay.
Yes.
Yes. So that still exists within the updated one. It just, you have to go into the actual items to do it. So if you click on this items link, then you get in here to do the same thing. So it's just an extra click, but it allows you to choose your fund as well as your shelving location and all of that.
So do you have to do that for each item in your list?
Should be able to do the batch update by if you go to the items and then you go to that line there at the top, that allows you to do it for everything. So if you go back to that items interface, there is that first there, isn't that for if for updating all the items?
It's for if you have like 4 or 5 copies of this particular line item, but I don't think it would do it for every line item in the selection list.
You're right.
I could be wrong about that. We can try it. Let me just play around in here because I didn't even realize that was missing, if I'm being honest. Yeah.
It has some good things to it when you go to add an item instead of it's just a different, easier interface. You go to it gives you a little block where you can just type in your letters and it pops up quicker.
Yeah, they have done a lot to consolidate things and make them a lot easier to navigate around. I don't know why they took away that batch option though. That seems like a weird choice. I didn't even realize that was missing because I usually do it at the line item level, but then I don't do them for real, and I rarely have more than a few that I'm playing with at once. So that I will look into that and see if there is something that I'm missing that can make that easier for you, because I can see that being a bit of a pain to have to add that fund on each individual line item. Wonder if I can do something.
If you click all line items.
Yeah, no, that just lets me filter. All right, I'll look into that. I'll let you know what I find out, okay?
Thank you.
Right. Anything else that people have noticed as being a change for the worse in the upgrade within selection lists? All right, well, let's just kind of explore around here a little bit and then we'll move on to purchase orders. This is very similar to what you'll see in a purchase order. The biggest change is the information and how it's laid out. So instead of having like half the information on the left side of the line item and half on the right side, it's all laid out here in a single line underneath. You do have the ability to expand. So this will show you the information that's already been put in for the line item. You can also expand all with this, this little button up here at the top. So you can expand everything. And so if you have, 10 or 11 different line items in a single selection list, you can expand all of them at once. A couple of things to kind of look at here is that you do have the ability to look at the status over here. You can see if it is connected to a purchase order, what that purchase order is. You can go into the line item worksheet here with worksheet. You can link to the catalog, or you can try to link it to something that exists in the catalog. Obviously, if it's already connected to a catalog record, this is where you'll see that link to that catalog record here. And then the notes that you can add them up here at the top. And then you can also add them here at the line item level. So you can add a new line item note kind of in the most basic way at the top by just selecting the line item that you'd like to add it to. And you can apply that to selected, and then it's going to show up for the line item that you've selected. But you can also come here to the notes and alerts link for the line item itself, and you'll see that you have a few more options. So you have the basic note option, which you can make vendor public. You also have an alert, so you can create different alert types. So this is something that you would do in acquisitions administration. And so if it was something that like you want all of your new releases to be sort of prioritized with cataloging when they come in, then you could have an alert type of new release, and then you could apply that note so that when it comes in, that's going to follow that line item all the way through to the invoice level. Your catalogers are going to be able to see it when they're pulling in the order, when they're receiving the order, and then you're able to you'll be able to kind of make sure that that information is following along throughout the process. So I think that that's kind of a nice change. Also, because one of them is an alert, I have a little flag here, which tells me that I should, if I'm coming at this later on in the cycle, I know that I need to click on this so I see what that alert is, so I know what to do with the item. A couple other things to note is that when you're actually here in the copies section, like I said, it used to be called items, now it's called copies, but it's basically the same thing. One of the things, and we'll talk about this again a little bit later because I think I have it listed as an issue that affects purchase orders, but it actually affects both purchase orders and selection lists, is that you're only able to see funds from the branch where you are logged in. So in this case, I am at a workstation of Stanley Albemarle. So I can see all funds that are Stanley, my parent, system organization, and I can see funds that are specific to my branch of Stanley Albemarle. I cannot see other branches within the Stanley system, which means that if you are doing centralized ordering, you are going to have to change your workstation in order to deal with funds from different branches. And that is also an active bug that we have added heat to because that is a big pain. So just something to watch out for if you are not seeing the funds you need in this dropdown when you are working with your selection list or purchase order. That's what's going on. The workaround right now is to log into a different workstation. I'd recommend doing that in an incognito window. That way you can kind of keep your regular workstation going without having to log in and out multiple times. Hopefully this is something that they remedy in the next upgrade because I know that a lot of our libraries that use acquisitions centralize it. So it's kind of important to be able to see everything all of the funds that you might need, regardless of which branch you're physically at. So just something to kind of be aware of if you run into that. All right, so that was basically what I wanted to show you within selection lists. Are there any other questions about selection lists? All right, well, let's hop into purchase orders. A lot of what we're seeing here is very similar to what we saw in selection lists. Is there a way to add number of copies? Yes. So when you're within that selection list, you would add the number of copies within the item link here, and then you could just add, let's say we're going to get 3 items. We would do this up at the top, we'd hit apply, and now I have 3 different ones that I can update. I can update them in batch here, and then that's going to apply to everything below. And I can, if I decide, oh, that was one too many, I can delete one. Did that answer your question? All right, well, let's take a look at purchase orders. A lot of this, yeah, so that's another one of those things where that batch in the 9.3, the batch copies line, I guess you'd call it, would work kind of across the board, and that's no longer the case. Again, I'm not sure if this was intentional, if there's a workaround that they recommend or a different process that they recommend, but I'll look into that and I'll let you know, because it's an issue with both copies and funds and really all of the stuff happening here. All right, so within purchase orders, obviously the biggest change is that we're in the Angular interface now. The line item notes with the vendor public option is available for purchase orders as well as selection lists. Notes that you put on at the selection list level will follow the item through to the purchase order level. We also get more descriptive information about activation status, and this is something that I'm really happy with, because previously, if something wouldn't activate, you would just get a generic message letting you know it couldn't activate. Sometimes you would get a thing, but it wasn't really a message that told you why it wouldn't activate. It was the note that told you it wouldn't activate. So, if you were missing price, you'd get a note that said 1 or more items is missing price data. That's not exactly what it said, but now what you have is that if something fails to activate, you actually get an error message that explains to some extent why. And this is a huge improvement. I get a lot of tickets saying this purchase order won't activate and I have no idea why. So hopefully this will help us to at least narrow down the cause, so that we can start to fix it rather than spending the first, several hours of work trying to figure out even why it's not activating. Another thing that I like, and maybe this was there before that I just did not see, but I don't think it was, is that you can actually mark items received or unreceived at the line item level from the purchase order, which I think is really useful. Couple of issues that we found. So we already talked about funds are only visible at the branch connected to the workstation. So that is an active bug that we've added heat to. And then notes from the holdings profile no longer map. So if you were using the subfield, I think it was subfield Z, in your holdings import profile, to put a note on the MARC record, that no longer maps to the MARC record. You can still add it. It will not stop your import from working, but it just doesn't show up most places. It still shows up one place, and I'll show you where that is. But if you're using that for information that you need to kind of carry forward, there is a workaround that we're recommending people use, and I'll show you that as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at some purchase orders. So we're going to go into our search again. I'm going to go to my purchase order search, and we're going to look for creator is me. And filter it down to a more recent creation time. And let's take a look at this one. So while it's fresh, let's go ahead and look quickly at the notes issue. So I said that there was still one place where you could see a note. it's not here. So if you've used the subfield to add a note at the to the MARC record itself, that's not going to show up anywhere here. But if you go into the worksheet for the line item, there is still a column for notes. So anything that was included in that subfield is still going to be visible here. However, if you are trying to do something where you really need that information to be a little bit more in your face and easily visible, one of the things that I have recommended is that when you're putting together those subfields in your holdings profile, you add a new one that would map to collection code. We don't have, to my knowledge, any libraries that are using a collection code right now. So it's basically, it's a free space. So if you add that to your holdings profile where you previously had notes, then anything that you put into that subfield will just show up in the collection code field instead. And that is visible both from this page and if you expand the line item, you'll see the collection code as well. So if that is something that you actively use in your library, that's how I would recommend working with it for now. That is entered as a bug in Launchpad. I don't know if it's something that's going to be addressed or not, though. So it might be best to just kind of develop a new process for working with those rather than hope that that is something that is addressed in a future patch or upgrade. Some other things to note here. So currently our status is one or more line items have no price. If I go ahead and get this line item ready for purchase, so let's do that briefly. I'll add my price, but I will also add all my item information. So let's make it adult fiction. Fund. At our circ modifier, and then I'm going to let the call number and barcode happen automatically, but I'll save these changes. So it now says that it is activatable. So I can activate my order, and when I do that, it just changes my status to on order. If there was something wrong with it, then this spot right here would tell me, generally speaking, what that issue is. It might still not be 100% clear, but it'll be much better than just the failure to activate that you would have gotten previously. Some other things to note here is that I do have this big red cancel button right here that I can work with, that I can click on to cancel a purchase order. I can also, oh, I'm still in the copies page. I can also come into my purchase order itself and I can mark my items received by selecting the ones that I want to receive, and then I can receive them at the line item level. I can also unreceive them at the line item level and cancel them at the line item level. I can navigate the purchase order. Right now it's listed, it's at rows of 500. That's obviously a little big, so I can make this, I think the default is generally 10. So that's what you'll usually see. But if you had, maybe a 40 item purchase order, you could make your row view 50 and then see everything all at once. And then you can navigate through it using these little navigation buttons here. I can expand all, just like with the selection list, or I can expand at the line item level. I can see my catalog link just as I could before. I also have the same notes and alerts options that I did in the selection list. So I can open this up. I can add notes to each individual line item. I can add alerts so that as it moves through the process, it's prioritized in the way that makes the most sense for my library's needs. I also see my provider here and can actually navigate directly to that provider. So if I wanted to see what my holdings definitions are, I can pretty quickly from that. Let's look really quickly back at 9.3 and we can get an idea of how this is different, because I do think that there are just some aesthetic changes that do make it slightly more readable. something. I make a lot of purchase orders that I don't actually add any line items to when I'm trying to test things out, so sometimes they're just empty. This one is not, at least. So you'll see one of the biggest differences is just where the information is laid out. In the older version, some of it was over here, some of it was over here. The actions menu, you had 4 different options. In the current one, everything is kind of together. And my actions menu actually has mark received or unreceived right here. So I don't even need to go up to my main actions menu, as well as the same things that it used to have in terms of updating barcodes and all that kind of thing. Some other things, you know, we still have the colors that let us know what something is, but we now have the indicator as well. So if you have color blindness or something like that, that makes it difficult for this pink to show up in a really visible way, then you now have the text indicator as well to let you know the status of something, which I think is a big improvement. From what I've heard, they're also working on adding an additional indicator, a border of some sort, for a future upgrade to continue improving the accessibility of these. One of the other things that you see right off the top is that the source of this, so we know that this came from basically from Cardinal, the native Evergreen catalog. It wasn't imported, it wasn't brought in through Z3950. It is something that exists within Cardinal currently, which I think is useful as well. So those are the basic changes to purchase orders. Do we have any questions about those? All right, well, let's talk a little bit about uploading MARC records. And I think that this is probably one of the biggest single changes for the 311 upgrade, simply because the previous uploader, it wasn't very pretty, but it also, when it failed, you often didn't understand why it failed. It was a little bit clunkier to use. I think that they have upgraded this in a way that makes it a lot more user-friendly, and you do get more information about kind of what's happening under the hood if something doesn't go right. So let's move into our uploader. So I'm going to go to my acquisitions menu, and I'm going to load MARC order records. Now, one of the big issues here, of course, and I didn't make a whole list because the only real known issue that we've discovered with this is the fiscal year dropdown. Currently, in the live production environment, you only have 2023. We are testing out adding 2024, and so it's available here in the next environment. It's turning out to be a little bit more complicated than we thought it would be to get it in there, so it's not in the live production environment yet. Those of you who are who do have your this fiscal year designated as 2024, you can come up here to the legacy upload interface, and this will bring you into the older version of the uploader. So from here, of course, you do have the fiscal year, you know, the full drop down, so you can choose whichever fiscal year works for you here. I'm going to move back into the new one though. And so just like with the cataloging uploader, if you are familiar with that, you can create templates for this, which I do have a template that I use, but you can also create a new one. We will call this training 2. And so once you have named your template up at the top, you just fill in sort of the base information for what you would want to be included in your general uploads, the ones that you do the most often. You probably wouldn't want to include the actual provider, just because you're going to be working with different providers often. But for this particular template, I'm just going to go ahead and include the provider. Generally, you'll probably want to have this as generic as possible to make it useful. This is going to come from Stanley. And I'm going to set my fiscal year to 2023. I'm not adding it to a selection list, but you can do that here. I'm going to create a purchase order. Just like in the old one, we recommend that you do not activate it at the point of upload. And then I'm going to come down here to my upload settings, and I will choose the same things that I have in the past. Just looks maybe a little bit nicer. So I'm going to choose system local and cardinal match, and I'll do orders as my merge profile. Or no, I'll do match only merge as my merge profile. And then I'm going to leave the rest of this stuff as it is, blank or with this 0. Over here, I'm going to choose the same things that I did in my previous version of the uploader, import non-matching records, and merge on best match, and then also load items for imported records. What's nice about this is they're all in the same place. In the old uploader, I don't know if you remember, but load items for imported records was sort of separate from everything else, and people missed it all the time. So I think this is a big improvement. Then I'm going to go ahead and create a queue. And I was testing the fiscal year thing out earlier today, so I've already got about 5 test queues. But let's do a 6th one. And then I'm going to choose a file. And I will say that I have sort of middling success with trying to import records. I think my 961s are always bad because I'm not a very good cataloger. So I'm hoping that this will work, but we'll give it a shot. So I'm uploading it, and this, this is giving me a lot of information about processing. Once it moves into the queue, I get that information as well. So it's much more like the cataloging uploader than the previous acquisitions uploader. We'll see if it works. All right, well, while we wait for that, are there any questions, any comments about the uploader? One thing that I've noticed that kind of drives me a little bonkers is that the green indicates that something is a required field. Ordering agency is also a required field, and if you don't fill this in, it doesn't work, which makes sense because it's sort of a key aspect of creating a purchase order. But it does not let you know it's required. And if I'm moving quickly, I completely forget to fill this in often, which means that it basically the upload button is grayed out and it doesn't work, and I can't figure out why it doesn't work. Maybe that's just me, but maybe something to look out for is that it's not marked as a required field, but it is a required field. I'm hoping this works because I wanted to show you that it lets you go into the queue itself, like the cataloging one does, which I think is really useful. Looks like it's stuck on something right now though. So I'm gonna let it do its thing for a little longer, but we'll go ahead and talk about the last thing, which is the new EDI option, which is basically not anything that you have to do within Evergreen. You need to talk to your vendor, basically. I think Ingram is set up to do it. So if you order from Ingram, that's where you would want to start. And basically let them know that you are interested in moving into using the ASM option. And everything is set up on our end to make that work. It just becomes a new EDI message that goes through. So you can find it if you go into your providers and look at your EDI messages. But then really the biggest thing that happens is that you then get a barcode on your packages that you can scan, and it will actually mark items as received from that scan, which is really useful. And again, I think Onslow is using it right now. So if you do have questions, maybe reaching out to them via Basecamp is a good idea because they may have some information about how that's working for them. Right. Are there any questions? Anything that people want to see in action before we wrap up? Anything that people have noticed that they're struggling with, or would just like tips that they want to share with everybody? Feel free to unmute yourself or put it in chat. One thing I will show you, I mentioned it earlier, but I haven't shown it to you in practice, is that if you are adding something manually from an existing catalog record, and so we'll go into our other actions and view place orders. So that's what this interface looks like now. And you now have the ability to, previously you could add it to an existing selection list or create a purchase order or add to a purchase order. You now have the ability to create a selection list at this point as well. So I can just name my selection list, and I've created it and added my first item to it directly from there. And again, it'll happen very quickly. There wasn't nearly the loading time that we've had in the past with acquisitions. All right. Well, we still have 3 minutes left, so I'm happy to hang out if people do have additional things to chat about, but that is the majority of what I was going to show. And so I appreciate you being here. I hope that the upgrade has, I know it's caused a few headaches, but I hope that it has caused more improvements to your acquisitions workflow than it has headaches. I think most of the big things we have either there's an existing bug for, or we have been able to address. But if there is anything that is still ongoing for you, please feel free to let us know, and we will start looking into it and do our best to help you figure out a new workaround or submit a bug if there's not one that's already there. So please let us know if stuff isn't going the way you hoped it would. And I will look into that issue with the batch adding in selection lists. Well, thank you everyone for being here, and I hope to see you at future events like this. Please let us know if you run into anything else.